Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Utah Stories program. A very exciting episode. How Main Street was traded for Wall Street. So in this episode, we are going back in time. We're getting in our time machine. I have to use the Wayback Machine, the Wayback Internet Archive, first of all, to just show you this story. This was the very first Utah story we produced that I worked on. It's the reason I started the website Utah Stories. And so we're going back using this Internet Archive to a story from 2007. It was a 4-month research project I did examining the history of Main Street, downtown Salt Lake City. So in the story itself, I go back in time all the way to the beginning of when the first Mormon pioneers came and settled in the valley, and how the economy built up, how it was established, and how the street, Main Street, was starkly divided between a north and a south. The Mormons on the north, the non-Mormon mining prospectors on the south. We're going to get into all of that in this episode. It's really interesting, fascinating if you love history, if you love economics. It's really what set the stage for how we cover news, politics, religion here at Utah Stories, and sort of created our whole brand and our magazine. So that's what we're going to share with you. This is going to be an installment project. We're talking about Main Street all month long, going along with our Main Street issue of Utah Stories magazine, which can now be picked up all along the Wasatch Front for free, or better yet, have it delivered right to your door. You can read our Main Street story in this magazine. You can read about alternative homeless solutions, Mount Olympus Garden, the reality of van life. It's kind of been a reality check for some of the van lifers in Moab. We get into that. Just an excellent issue. Ogden's 25th Street. We're checking out what cities can be doing for local businesses to help them. We strongly believe that it's better to have more locally vibrant, strong businesses than to have publicly traded behemoths. And I'm going to get into this episode as to how and why we consider it to be better. All right, so before I get to that, go out to Utah Stories, subscribe to the Voice of Local Utah by putting your email address right in here. We will send you one single email every week. You'll get the Voice of Local Utah, or you can subscribe to our print magazine right here by clicking on that button. $2 a month, $24 for the entire year, and you will be supporting our intrepid local journalism that researches, investigates crony capitalism, among many other things, but helps to make Utah a better place. That's really our goal, to maintain the quality of life of Utah that we all want to enjoy moving forward. Okay, so let's dive right in. Going into how Main Street was traded for Wall Street. Again, this was from 2007. I interviewed Tony Weller, John Sparrows, owner of Lambs at the time, Bill Benyon, owner of Benyon Jewelers, Tom Warner. He's now retired. Richard Wyrick's now deceased. Bart Stringham's now retired. Doug Danzy, a city planner at the time, and Alan Barnett. The question was it a good idea to build malls on Main Street? Was it a good idea to take Salt Lake City's historic Main Street and demolish dozens of buildings to build giant malls? This was a big project, and this was before City Creek Center was even built that we started this. But wanted to get to the bottom of this because I think that one thing that's neglected by our generation is that we actually have the power to build and shape our cities in the form that we want to see them in. We have the power as consumers and as voters and residents to vote in the people who share our vision for what a downtown shopping district should look like. And the question is, do we want to have more Wall Street traded corporations dominating our retail economic picture? Or would we prefer to have more locally owned businesses in our local economic picture? And I thought, why not pose that question and open it up and see what people think? It was a really awesome response we got to this story, even though I am a terrible speller And I've already found some problems with this article, but I'm going to go ahead and read the beginning of it to you now. So, going back to the beginning of how this territory of Utah was established for its first 20 years of existence, from 1847 to 1865, Salt Lake City was viewed by the rest of the United States as a remote outpost. The Salt Lake Valley at this time was still Mexican territory and nearly exclusively a Mormon community. Mormon pioneers had the hopes of building a new Zion called Deseret. It was complete with their own currency and written language. The pioneers' early existence relied on hard work, self-sufficiency, and pretty much cutting off ties from the outside world, because this was before a railroad. What would later become the ZCMI department store was originally established as a distribution center for the crops and the products that the pioneers produced. Mormon pioneers maintained a unique form of communism whereby products and wealth were shared and distributed. The practice began with ward houses where they exchanged their produce, and continued with an idea called ZCMI, which stood for Zion's Cooperative Mercantile Incorporated. It was established by Brigham Young to organize the exchange of goods and services. ZCMI offered new converts from Europe subsidized food, cheap land that they eventually paid off through the Perpetual Immigration Fund, and a way to pay for their passage across the Great Plains as early as 1868. However, the Mormons' self-sufficient lifestyle would completely change. Federal soldiers stationed in Camp Floyd and later moving into mountains discovered silver. And they announced it to the world because those federal soldiers wanted this area, this territory, to be taken over or at least inhabited by a strong non-Mormon element. And that started the gold and silver rushes that defined the era. Within a few years after the discovery of silver, Salt Lake City had an entirely new element of, quote, whores and hoodlums. Like water and oil, neither Mormon nor prospector would have very little interest in intermingling. This was the beginning of what would forever be known as the Great Divide. Sorry for the typos of those of you who are reading. So, on the north end of Main Street around the temple's still in the same place it's always been in. They moved the statue of Brigham Young. But you had the pious, the very tidy, the neat living Mormon pioneers who epitomized wholesome living. It's just like the kids were all working. The parents were disciplining their children. They were working land and farms at the time, and they'd all assemble in this assembly hall in the tabernacle. That's what it looked like on the south end, or on the north end. Then on the south end, you had all these prospectors who were coming to town, getting rich quick, essentially. And Brigham Young prohibited any Mormons from integrating with the prospectors. It was totally forbidden to get involved in mining. But this guy's wearing a spotted mink coat with a cigar in his mouth. There were all these cigar rolling shops on the south end of Main Street, all these taverns and whiskey shops. It was nicknamed Whiskey Street. There was the W.M. Sickney Cigar Company, where this picture was taken from, and these were silver mine prospectors. And they started building, the silver miners, as they started building and accruing more wealth, they started building mansions on what was known as Brigham Street, which later became known as South Temple. And these wealth was just pouring into the city, really kind of dissolving all of the exclusive economic control that the Mormon founders had at the time. But the Mormon half of the city was centered around ZCMI and Temple Square, right? Forever. The ZCMI was the main department store, and a few fellow LDS members were always encouraged to only exclusively shop at ZCMI. But Auerbach's became an exception. It was owned by Fred and Herbert Auerbach, of Jewish religion and descent. Both non-Mormon and Mormon shoppers loved the place because The Auerbach Company knew exactly what people wanted to buy. These guys were very well adapted at running a very effective department store. And by 1939, Auerbach's was 6 levels. It was on 3rd South. It was just this incredible place that everybody loved. And so by 1939, we'll fast forward now, the new president of Auerbach's was Fred Auerbach. They had built up their shop that was doing very, very well, and this was how it looked by then. It was just this massive shop offering all these departments, and this was their 75th year anniversary that they celebrated in 1939. But as Salt Lake City began to progress and develop over the years, you can see how beautiful the Main Street was on the north end near the ZCMI department store. I believe this is from around 1955 from the Shipler collection. Something new began to happen. These big corporate retailers began popping up on the street, and so here you see a sign for Penny's. And on the street at this time, you can see that the parking was all angled. All the vehicles parked on the street were angled. The sidewalk was much more narrow than it was today. You had these overhanging signs, these awnings, people looking through the shop windows to see what they wanted to buy. Families using the promenade to just go and people watch. Really cool. This was prior to 1957. This was a Saturday afternoon stroll. This is how my grandmothers both described Main Street to me. They'd ride a trolley downtown from Murray or from Sugar House, and they'd get down there, and it was full of people and very vibrant. But then something happened that was very odd. Salt Lake City began to disappear as people knew it. It was just losing its appeal, and this was because a lot of people began, I'd say in the early 1970s, to just move out to the suburbs, get out of the city, and because you could afford more land, just like today. You could afford a bigger house. You could cars were everywhere, were ubiquitous. You could get on a highway, get out, get to your bigger home than you could ever buy near the city. And so the first Kmart actually opened in Utah, one of the very first Kmarts. And I believe this was in Parley's Creek, where now there's a Walmart. This opened their new store. And then also one of the very first malls west of the Mississippi was built, called the Cottonwood Mall. And these malls, and so in 1963, the Cottonwood Mall was built, first mall west of the Mississippi. And it's like people thought, well, why do I need to go down to Main Street? I don't need to go downtown anymore. I'm going to stay out here in the suburbs. And as that began happening, all these downtown merchants began to realize something had to change. They had to do something to attract more people into downtown. What they had to do, the easiest solution was to copy what they had in the suburbs and bring it downtown. So they subsequently built Sears near downtown, and they also decided to copy the Cottonwood Mall and build the ZCMI into a mall. Two experts we spoke to, we have these video interviews. Maybe I'll resurrect them if this gets enough views or enough popularity. But a guy named Alan Barnett, a local historian, said this was awful to try to emulate in the suburbs what was downtown. We should have stuck with making downtown historic, retain the preservation of the integrity of the building and the streets, make downtown something completely separate and unique from what you find in the suburbs. And then another city planner we spoke to named Doug Danzy said, no, this had to be done. We needed to build a mall in downtown. The business district was suffering. It had to be done. But it was a trade of Wall Street for Main Street, of Main Street for Wall Street. It was like we were going to build spaces for Wall Street retailers to inhabit, and it started undermining our local economy. So now let's talk about the decline of Main Street that happened a little more. They started to call Salt Lake City an ugly city because the architecture was in disarray, as I pointed out on the sidewalks. The sidewalks were starting to look bad, in a state of disrepair. The tax base was diminishing as businesses were getting less, so the sidewalks weren't being repaired like they should. There were parking problems because now everybody was commuting to the city. And they tore up the trolley line, so everybody had to drive their cars to the city, and that created a problem with there not being enough parking. So they hired a firm out of Chicago, Barton Ashman, to decide what should happen next. And they decided beautification projects should happen. And so they envisioned both beautification projects and converting ZCMI into a mall. And so what happened next was, if you look at this is a really interesting photo if you're watching on YouTube. The dotted line shows what they were going to take out to create this mall. And these really cool old buildings are all sandwiched together. I believe most of these are ZCMI-owned buildings. But they said, we're going to just destroy these and build a big cinder block mall. And they took out the facade. Then look what they got after they did that. They took the old facade and just attached it to this cinder block building. It just looks hideous. It just terrible. I mean, this was like the early 1980s when this was taken, but this was what they did. They took the beautiful old facade and attached it to a cinder block building and said, voila, we got a mall. But the addition to the parking structure really was a great addition for so many people, because now people could drive downtown, get safe, easy, convenient parking. Something they didn't have before. But then they thought in 1978, why not build another mall? And so this writer named Robert H. Woody was excellent at chronicling the progression over the years of what happened with downtown, and very interesting articles. But we tore down this beautiful old historic building with several local businesses in it. And we decided we're going to build a mall here and fill it with national corporate chain stores. This was known as the Constitution Building. This was the building in its height. It had gotten into a state of disrepair, according to stories I'd read. And then they debated whether or not they should build a bridge connecting the two malls together. And luckily, the officials torpedoed that idea, which we now, interestingly enough, have today. The City Creek Mall has a bridge, a sky bridge right over the street. But here's what happened that was so terrible. So by 1979, they had done these beautification projects, widening the sidewalk, taking out like that angled parking, converting it to just sideways parking, so removing about 60% of all the parking. And then they built all the parking over on the south end where the ZCMI Center Mall was, where now the Crossroads Mall was. Auerbach's had no parking, so you had to walk there or find parking in the scarce areas where there was parking. They no longer could survive, so after 114 years, they closed their door. They closed their doors. And Mayor at the time, Ted Wilson, said, I think we need to find some retail destination to replace the volume of business that's vacated by Auerbach's, because otherwise there's going to be some serious trouble, because ZCMI Center had taken over, but still that wasn't going to accommodate for all of the volume that would be needed to accommodate all the shoppers. And so these beautification projects, obviously people are beginning to realize they were being killed with kindness. This quote, it says, "You are killing us with kindness." This Exchange Place beautification project had began 1 week, and it was supposed to be done after a certain amount of time, but it required a whole lot longer. Wolf Sporting Goods closed, so did Broadway Music, so did Baker Shoes. All of these, they call them nails in the coffin, began to close. All of these businesses. And just sad, They just thought, what can we do to attract people into downtown? And they opened the next mall. They opened the Crossroads Mall. And Ted Wilson, along with Mickey Mouse, were there to show people the beautiful new Crossroads Mall that opened in 1980. So the Crossroads Mall was inevitably filled with tons of Wall Street traded corporations. The number one anchor tenant was Nordstrom. I think like the Foot Locker might have been around back then, as well as the entire food court was full of, all the popular brands, Wendy's, McDonald's, Sbarro and whatnot. But the problem was the whole south end of the street began to collapse, and they didn't know what to do and it's really still never come back. And it's only kind of been exacerbated since they built the City Creek Center Mall. And so my conclusion was, when we did this story back in 2006, was it is way better for political leaders to just stay out of the business of economic development than to give subsidies to Wall Street traded corporations. Why should they get the hand up when local businesses are the ones that provide far more local economic vibrancy? And I use that word vibrancy, but what I mean by that, if you shop at a local store, that local store uses local providers for both ingredients, if it's a restaurant, like the farm-to-table movement is so strong, or for their products, they're more likely to buy from local manufacturers and local service providers, of course. And so it's been calculated that every dollar you spend at a local shop, 76% of that dollar is recirculated in the local economy, compared to a corporate shop where 3% is redistributed into the local economy. You're strengthening your economy by buying local. That was completely not understood or even examined when they were making this trade in downtown for local, independent, strong, 100-year-old businesses for a Nordstrom, which was, started in Oregon, not any better than Paris Company or Auerbach's, but we decided to give those giant corporations a hand up and a handout and a leg up over all of our locally owned businesses. And it was really sad that this happened. So 9 most terrifying words in the English language from a small business point of view. I'm from the government and I'm here to help. I think government leaders need to understand that. Local businesses don't have any problem competing side by side against big Wall Street traded corporations. I don't think at all. But when you give the Wall Street corporations a big handout, that's when they have a problem competing. That should end. That should stop. So that concludes this part of this story. If you like this type of content, I'd love to do more of this. Please like this video, share it with a friend, share it on your social media. That would be an amazing thing you could do for us, because we don't have any other mechanism by distributing this podcast. If you'd like to see more of this, you can support our content by becoming a subscriber to our digital newsletter, and as I said, a subscribe to our magazine for $2 a month. With that, thank you so much for watching. Let me tell you about our awesome sponsors this month, which include Wasatch Beers. Wasatch Beers is the home of the original Utah beer pioneer, Greg Scherf. I've got a clip I want to share with you from my interview with Greg Scherf from 12 years ago. Really fun to go back and look at this. Here's how Greg Scherf started Wasatch Beers.
Came here in 1974. I tell my Mormon friends I didn't come in a pull cart, but I did hitchhike here, so I think that counts for a little something. I graduated from Marquette University in Milwaukee in 1974 in June, and I asked my parents if they would be disappointed if I didn't go to graduation, and they said, anyway, we had 5 kids and lots of graduations, so I think they were glad to get out of it. And I said, well, fine, why don't you just mail me my diploma? I'm heading out to Park City. So I packed my backpack, and my mom took me to the freeway entrance, and I hitchhiked to Utah. when I called my parents in Milwaukee and said, I got this new business idea, which I've always coming up with new business ideas, most of them being dismissed pretty readily. But I told my parents on the phone, I said, I've got a new idea. I just came back from Seattle, and I'm going to start a microbrewery, they call it, in Park City. And there was kind of dead silence on the phone. And my mom finally said, well, I think that's one of your better ideas because it's going to be recession-proof. She said people will drink in the good times to celebrate and in the bad times to forget their worries. So I think that's a really great idea, so I think you should go for it. My dad was like, let me know if I can help, and he actually made me a small local loan to get started. Wasatch Brew Pub, welcome. I was thinking of renaming it, and I wanted to call it Rockwell's Porter, after Porter Rockwell, the angel of death, who was Brigham Young's bodyguard. And I thought that was a really clever name, Rockwell's Porter instead of Porter Rockwell. And I went with some of our focus group, young kids, and explained the idea to them, and they looked at me like I was crazy, and I asked them if they knew who Porter Rockwell was, and he said that he was a famous painter. And I said, so the only people that knew who he was the Mormon community, who typically aren't our best customer. So I said, forget the subtlety of it. Let's just go with Polygamy Porter. Everybody gets that. So we came out with Polygamy Porter in 2001, and people accused us of being brilliant marketers because of the timing of the Olympics, and that was just simply dumb luck. That really wasn't a thought-out concept. We came out with a beer, and all of a sudden people were coming to Utah for the Olympics, and then we had a billboard company that refused to put up our Polygamy Porter billboard. And whenever it was Reagan billboard, and whenever you say censorship, the media comes out of the woodwork. So we had a story, and we said, we're being censored, and all of a sudden, all the media, including The Economist, when we had a full story done in The Economist magazine, which I thought, here in Utah, and a microbrewery, and pretty soon, this was the early days of e-commerce and the internet, but we started getting these orders from all over the world for Polygamy Porter t-shirts, and we crashed our site. We had all the servers packing boxes with t-shirts to send it, Italy and Japan and all over the world. And what had happened was all the media was coming to Utah for the 2002 games, which were going to start in a couple months. Of course, nobody had won a medal. They're all doing background stories in Utah. And this became one of their favorite subjects and continued to fuel the fire. And, it was good for business.
Wasatch Beers is celebrating their 35th year anniversary, and we're happy to show you that clip as well as a couple more we're going to be showing to you in the next couple of weeks. So stay tuned for those. And let me talk about my next sponsor, which is cmrbeef.com. Go visit them. That is Canyon Meadows Ranch. Canyon Meadows grass-fed beef has an incredible product. It is all natural, no antibiotics, no hormones, a product where cows spend their entire life out on lush, rich pastures, eating the most nutritious, the best pasture that you could ever eat if you're a cow. And they work with nature to make this all-natural, amazing grass-fed beef. I love what they provide. Go to cmrbeef.com/Utah Stories to get 10% off your order and buy a whole cow like we did. It is an amazing deal. You get 10% off your order, and you get your freezer full of ribeyes, T-bones, spare ribs, all sorts of amazing cuts, roasts, ground beef, and you will absolutely love it, and your body will thank you for it. You feel great after eating grass-fed beef. There seriously is a nutritional density difference that you should learn about. All right, with that, thank you again so much for watching. I will see you next time.